It was a quiet morning on the outskirts of a small village when something unbelievable happened. An elderly woman walking home from the market heard faint whimpers behind her. When she turned around, two tiny puppies were standing on their hind legs, paws raised as if begging for help. Their fur was matted, eyes filled with desperation, and their small bodies trembled with cold and hunger. The woman froze, torn between pity and confusion. "Oh dear, where did you two come from?" she whispered. But when she bent down, one of the puppies tugged at her skirt, urging her to follow. The path they led her down that day would uncover a truth so heartbreaking, it left the entire village in tears. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The sun rose slowly over the sleepy village, painting the thatched rooftops in shades of gold. A gentle breeze stirred the tall grass along the dirt road, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. Birds sang softly in the distance. It was the kind of morning that made the world feel calm, almost untouched by time. Down that quiet lane walked Martha, an elderly woman with a small wicker basket on her arm and a cane tapping gently against the ground. Her steps were slow but steady, and every morning she followed the same path, from her tiny cottage to the old market on the edge of town. It wasn't the groceries that drew her there. It was routine, the simple comfort of seeing familiar faces. The villagers often greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Miss Martha," they'd call. She'd smile, nod politely, and continue on her way. Though kind and gentle, Martha lived alone. Her husband had passed years ago, and her children had moved far away. Her days were quiet, filled with knitting, tending her small garden, and watching sunsets from her wooden porch. Yet beneath her calm smile lived a deep ache, the kind that only loneliness brings. Still, she never complained. She believed kindness had a way of circling back, even if it took a lifetime. That morning, as she walked home from the market, her basket filled with bread and apples, the world felt perfectly ordinary. The sky was clear, the birds sang, and the wind brushed softly against her cheeks. She had no idea that within a few minutes, her peaceful routine would be shattered forever by two tiny creatures who would change her life in ways she could never imagine. Martha had just turned onto the narrow, dirt path that led to her cottage when she heard it, a faint, high-pitched sound that didn't belong to the morning's peaceful rhythm. She stopped mid-step, her cane pressing into the soft earth. The sound came again, this time clearer. It wasn't the chirping of birds or the rustle of leaves. It was crying, tiny, desperate cries. Her heart tightened. She glanced around, scanning the quiet fields on either side of the road. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice trembling. No answer, only the whisper of the wind. She took a few cautious steps forward, her eyes narrowing toward a patch of tall grass near the roadside. The crying grew louder, two distinct whimpers, weak yet persistent. Martha's breath caught as she pushed aside the grass with her cane. There, sitting in the dirt, were two tiny puppies, barely bigger than her slippers. Their fur was dirty, matted with mud, and their ribs showed through their thin skin. One of them tried to stand but stumbled, letting out a faint squeak. The other looked up at her with pleading eyes, the kind of eyes that could melt even the hardest heart. "Oh, you poor little souls," she whispered, kneeling slowly. The puppies didn't run. Instead, they crawled closer, pressing their tiny paws together as if begging for mercy. Martha felt her chest tighten. She reached into her basket, broke off a piece of bread, and held it out. The pups sniffed it hesitantly before devouring it in seconds, tails wagging weakly. Someone must have abandoned them. There was no collar, no blanket, no mother nearby. The realization hit her like a stone. She looked down the empty road, her heart aching. "Who could do such a thing?" she murmured. As she gathered the trembling pups into her arms, one of them tugged gently at her sleeve. Looking up with eyes full of urgency, Martha frowned. "What is it, little one?" she asked softly. Then, to her astonishment, the tiny puppy turned and began to walk away, pausing every few steps to make sure she was following. Martha hesitated at first, unsure whether to follow. The path the puppy took veered off the main road and disappeared into the tall grass. "Where are you going, little one?" she whispered, clutching her basket. The other puppy stayed by her foot, gazing up with wide, trusting eyes. Something about the way they looked at her, not with fear but with hope, stirred something deep within her heart. Slowly, she took a step forward. The puppy leading the way turned its head and wagged its tiny tail as if saying, "Come on, hurry." Martha couldn't help but smile. Her knees ached, her back protested, but she followed anyway, curiosity and compassion guiding her feet. As she walked, the second puppy trotted beside her, occasionally brushing against her skirt, as if to reassure her that she was doing the right thing. It was a strange feeling. For years she had walked this path alone, but now for the first time in a long while she didn't feel lonely. Each little bark and glance from the puppies made her heart feel lighter, warmer. After a few minutes, the puppy leading her stopped suddenly and looked back, whimpering softly. Martha knelt, setting her basket on the ground. The puppy approached her again, placing its tiny paw on her knee. For a brief, wordless moment, they just looked at each other. An old woman with years of solitude behind her, and two abandoned souls searching for kindness. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me," she murmured, her voice trembling, "but I'll help you. I promise." The words felt right, natural, like a vow she was meant to make. The lead puppy barked once, turned again, and began walking faster, its little tail wagging with determination. Martha stood, brushed the dirt from her skirt, and followed. She didn't know where this strange journey would end, only that something inside her told her this was no ordinary. An encounter, something or someone was waiting to be found. The narrow path curved away from the main road, leading deeper into the countryside. Wildflowers brushed against Martha's skirt as she walked, their soft petals brushing her trembling hands. The puppy ahead kept looking back, pausing now and then to make sure she hadn't stopped. Each time their eyes met, it gave her a reason to keep moving. The second puppy stayed close, its tiny paws patting beside her cane, never letting her walk alone. "Where are you taking me, my little ones?" Martha asked softly. Her voice quivered with both curiosity and worry. The sun was climbing higher now, and the warmth pressed gently against her back. Still, there was an uneasiness in the air, a feeling that something waited at the end of this trail, something that demanded her heart's courage. As they walked, the landscape around them changed. The smooth dirt road turned into uneven ground, speckled with stones and roots. A faint breeze carried the smell of damp leaves and something else, something faintly metallic, almost like rust. Martha's grip on her cane tightened. "Oh dear," she murmured under her breath. "I shouldn't be out here alone." But then the puppy leading her barked again, a short, insistent sound. It wasn't random. It was calling her, begging her not to turn back. Martha looked down at the second puppy sitting by her feet, tilting its head, eyes filled with trust. That simple look melted away her hesitation. "All right," she sighed, her tone tender but resolute. "I'm coming." She adjusted her shawl and continued walking deeper and deeper into the unknown. The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere far off a crow called. The puppies pressed forward with growing urgency, their tiny bodies trembling with purpose. Martha's heart pounded as she realized these puppies weren't lost. They were leading her somewhere, and whatever lay ahead was important enough that even these fragile creatures refused to give up. The narrow trail grew quieter with every step Martha took. The comforting hum of the village had faded long ago, replaced by the soft whisper of wind through the trees. She could hear the crunch of dry leaves beneath her shoes, the rhythmic tap of her cane, and the occasional bark from the little puppy leading the way. It felt as though the world around her was holding its breath, waiting for her to discover something she wasn't meant to overlook. Sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering golden patches along the forest floor. Dust motes danced in the beams, and Martha paused for a moment, her old eyes tracing their gentle motion. The path seemed endless, winding between old oak trees and tall ferns that brushed her arms as she passed. Despite her fatigue, there was something oddly peaceful about it. The forest, though silent, didn't feel unkind. It felt expectant. The puppies pressed on with quiet determination. Every few steps, the one beside her would look up as if asking, "You're still with us, right?" And Martha would nod softly, whispering encouragement. "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." The simple act of speaking to them made her heart ache less. A few minutes later, the path dipped into a small clearing. There was no sound, not even birdsong. Just stillness. The lead puppy stopped suddenly, tail lowered, nose twitching at the air. Martha slowed too, her breath catching. Something about this place felt different, heavier, as if it carried a story of sorrow. The old woman's heart began to race. She glanced around, clutching her basket close. "What is it, little one?" she asked softly. The puppy didn't move. It just stood there, staring toward a cluster of bushes at the far end of the clearing. And in that eerie stillness, Martha realized this was no random walk. The puppies had brought her here for a reason. Something or someone was waiting just beyond that patch of green. Martha's heart thumped in her chest as she stared at the bushes ahead. The lead puppy whined softly, taking hesitant steps toward the dense thicket. The other one stayed close to her legs, tail tucked between its tiny hind paws. The silence was unnerving. Not a bird sang, not a leaf moved. Even the wind seemed to have paused, waiting for what she would find next. With trembling hands, Martha used her cane to part the branches. The faint smell of damp earth filled her nose, but beneath it was something else, faint yet distinct. A metallic tang, sharp and cold. Her breath hitched. For a moment she feared the worst. Then she saw it, a small wooden crate half buried under leaves and mud. The lid was cracked open, and the edges were splintered as though someone had kicked it open in a hurry. Martha knelt slowly, her knees creaking as she pushed the leaves aside. Inside the crate were torn pieces of cloth, a broken water bottle, and scraps of bread, old, moldy, untouched. Her heart sank. It wasn't just trash. This was where the puppies had been kept. "Oh, you poor angels," she whispered, her throat tightening. The thought of them trapped here, hungry and frightened, made tears well up in her eyes. She could almost picture it. The dark night, the cold rain, the sound of little whimpers no one came to hear. One of the puppies sniffed the crate, then looked up at her, letting out a faint, pitiful cry. Martha reached out and stroked its head gently. "You were left here, weren't you?" she murmured. "Left to die?" Her gaze drifted beyond the crate, where faint footprints were pressed into the soft ground, human footprints. Fresh enough that the edges hadn't yet faded. A chill ran down her spine. Whoever had abandoned them might not have gone far. Then she noticed something else. A small, tattered baby blanket caught on a bush nearby. She picked it up carefully. It smelled faintly of smoke and something bitter, like gasoline. Her lips trembled. Who would do something like this? Before she could think further, the lead puppy barked sharply and ran past the crate, toward the darker part of the woods. Martha froze. Something else was waiting to be found. Martha's heart skipped a beat as the puppy darted into the darker stretch of forest. "Wait, come back," she called, her voice trembling. The sound of rustling leaves echoed ahead, followed by a faint, broken whimper. Not from the two puppies beside her, but from somewhere deeper within the shadows. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it carried a pain so raw that it sent chills down her spine. She glanced at the second puppy, who sat trembling near her feet, whining nervously. The little creature's eyes flicked between her and the darkness, as if pleading with her to hurry. Martha swallowed hard, clutching her cane tighter. Every instinct told her to turn back. She was old, frail, and alone. But something stronger held her there, compassion. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward. The forest canopy grew thicker, swallowing the light. Branches brushed against her shawl and her cane sank slightly into the damp earth. With each step, the cries became clearer. A weak, rasping sound that seemed to fade, then rise again. It wasn't just a cry of hunger. It was a cry of pain. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm coming." Finally, she pushed past a curtain of overgrown vines and saw it, a small hollow beneath an old fallen tree. The lead puppy stood guard beside it, tail low, ears perked, letting out soft whines. Martha crouched down slowly, peering inside. Her breath caught. There, lying motionless on the cold ground, was a third puppy, smaller, weaker, its chest barely rising with each shallow breath. Its fur was soaked and matted, its eyes half closed. "Oh, dear heavens," she gasped, tears filling her eyes. She reached inside, her fingers trembling as she gently lifted the tiny, fragile body. The little one whimpered faintly, its head lolling against her palm. The other two puppies pressed close, licking the weak one's face. It was as if they'd brought her here for this moment, as if they'd been searching for someone kind enough to save their last sibling before it was too late. Martha cradled the tiny, shivering puppy against her chest, her heartbeat trembling beneath her frail frame. The poor thing was so light, so fragile, it barely felt real in her arms. Its fur was damp and cold, and every weak breath it took seemed like a small battle for life. "Oh, my little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've been fighting all alone, haven't you?" The other two puppies circled around her feet, whining anxiously, their tails wagging as if begging her to help. Martha gently wrapped the weakest one in her woolen shawl, holding it close to her chest. The warmth of her body seemed to stir it slightly. A faint twitch, a soft sigh. It was still alive, barely. Tears welled in her eyes. How long had they been out here? A day, 2? Maybe more. She looked back toward the broken crate and the torn blanket. The pieces began to form a cruel picture. Someone hadn't just abandoned these puppies. They had left them to die. Martha's heart ached. She thought of the long, lonely nights she had spent talking to her late husband's photograph, wishing for something, anything, to give her purpose again. And now, here it was, lying in her arms, weak and innocent, asking for nothing but love. She pressed her lips to the puppy's damp forehead. "Not anymore," she murmured. "You're safe now. I promise." The puppy whimpered softly, its tiny paw brushing her chin as if to acknowledge her words. The other two climbed onto her lap, pressing against her shawl to share their warmth. In that fragile, tear-stained moment, something shifted in Martha's heart, a feeling she hadn't known in years. Belonging. But as she stood to leave, something caught her eye. Near the fallen tree, half buried in dirt, was a small metal tag glinting faintly in the light. Martha bent down and picked it up. It wasn't a dog tag. It was part of a keychain shaped like a heart with faded engraving that read, "For Emma, love always, Dad." Her breath caught. The puppies hadn't just been abandoned. They were a part of someone's story, one that had ended in tragedy. And now she was holding the last living pieces of it. Martha didn't waste another second. She tightened her shawl around the weakest puppy, clutching it to her chest as she turned toward the path home. "Come on, babies," she urged softly, her voice trembling. The other two puppies followed close behind, their tiny paws pattering against the leaves. Every step she took felt heavier, slower, but she didn't stop. The forest that had felt calm earlier now seemed endless, each shadow stretching longer, each sound echoing louder. Her cane sank deep into the muddy ground as she pushed forward. Her breath came in quick, uneven gasps. "Hold on, sweetheart," she whispered to the fragile pup in her arms. "Just hold on a little longer." She could feel its tiny heartbeat fluttering against her chest like a fragile bird. The path was steeper than she remembered. Her knees ached, her back screamed, but the thought of losing the little life in her arms drove her onward. The two stronger puppies ran ahead, then circled back, barking and urging her on, as if they understood what was at stake. Finally, she saw the familiar fence that marked the edge of her garden. Relief flooded her eyes, but she didn't slow down. She pushed through the gate, stumbled across the yard, and nearly fell to her knees as she reached the porch. Inside, the house was dim and cool. She laid the weak puppy on a soft towel by the fireplace, her trembling hands moving with a nurse's instinct she hadn't used in years. She poured warm milk into a small bowl, soaked a piece of cloth, and gently placed it near the puppy's mouth. "Please drink, my love," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. The puppy's tiny tongue moved weakly. Just a drop, but it was enough to give her hope. Behind her, the other two curled up close to their sibling, sharing their warmth. Martha sank to her knees, breathless and shaking. "You're home now," she murmured, stroking their soft heads. "And I won't let anything happen to you." That night, Martha's small cottage flickered with the warm glow of a single oil lamp. Outside, the wind howled across the fields, rattling the window panes. Inside, 3 tiny lives clung to hope. The weakest puppy lay wrapped in Martha's old wool shawl near the fireplace, its breath shallow but steady. The other 2 curled close, their tiny bodies pressed against it as if to lend their strength. Martha moved back and forth across the room, her tired feet dragging but her heart unwilling to rest. She boiled milk in a small pan, stirred in honey for energy, and waited until it was just warm enough. Then, with a trembling hand, she dipped a corner of a cloth and gently pressed it to the fragile puppy's lips. "Come on, my darling," she whispered softly. "You've made it this far. Don't give up now." For hours she repeated the process when feeding, warming, and praying. She barely noticed the passing of time. Her frail body ached, her eyes burned from exhaustion, but she refused to close them. Each time the puppy took a weak sip, her heart leapt with relief. Each time it whimpered, fear clutched at her chest. At one point, she thought she saw it stop breathing. "No, no, please," she cried, scooping it into her hands, rubbing its tiny chest with her thumbs. "Breathe, little one. Breathe." Seconds felt like hours until, finally, the puppy stirred faintly, letting out the smallest of sighs. Tears streamed down Martha's face as she whispered, "Good girl. That's it. Stay with me." The hours crawled by. The fire dimmed, her candle flickered, and dawn slowly crept through the window. Martha sat beside the puppies, her head resting against the chair, her hand still placed gently over the shawl. She was half asleep when she felt it, a faint lick against her palm. Her eyes fluttered open. The smallest puppy had lifted its head for the first time, eyes half open, weak but alive. Martha let out a trembling laugh, part sob, part relief. "Oh, thank heaven," she whispered. "You're a fighter," outside. The first light of morning touched the hills, and inside that humble cottage 3 tiny hearts beat in unison, alive against all odds. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the thin lace curtains, filling the little cottage with a soft golden glow. The fire had burned low, but its warmth still lingered in the air. Martha stirred awake in her rocking chair, her body stiff, her eyelids heavy. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and until she heard it, a soft, high-pitched yawn, her heart leapt. She looked down toward the blanket by the hearth. The smallest puppy, the one who had fought so hard through the night, was sitting up, its tiny head wobbling, eyes blinking open for the first time. "Oh, my sweet angel," Martha gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Tears blurred her vision as she reached out to stroke the puppy's fur. It felt warm, alive. The other 2 puppies wagged their tails and barked joyfully, circling their sibling as if celebrating its return to life. Martha laughed through her tears, her voice breaking with emotion. "You did it. You really did it." She poured a small bowl of warm milk, placing it gently before them. One by one, the puppies lapped at it eagerly, tails wagging in perfect rhythm. The sound, soft, rhythmic, full of life, filled the house like music. Martha leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her in waves. But this time it wasn't the weariness of loneliness. It was the peace of someone who had saved something precious. "You've brought my home back to life," she whispered, smiling faintly. The smallest puppy looked up at her, milk dripping from its chin, and let out a tiny bark. Martha chuckled softly, wiping her tears. For the first time in years, her house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, full of love, warmth, and the miracle of a brand new beginning. Later that afternoon, Martha sat on her porch with the puppies nestled in a basket beside her. The sun was warm, the air still. Birds fluttered between the branches of her apple tree, and for the first time in years, her home felt alive with laughter. Soft, joyful barks that echoed through the quiet countryside. But amid that peace, one thought still haunted her. Who would leave such helpless creatures to die? Her question was answered sooner than she expected. As she sat feeding the puppies, her neighbor, Clara, walked up the dirt path carrying a small bundle of herbs. "Martha, I heard barking, and are those yours?" she asked, her eyes wide in surprise. Martha smiled softly. "They found me, Clara. 2 of them led me into the woods. And I found another one there, barely alive." Clara's face paled. She set the herbs down on the porch rail. "In the woods near the old creek?" Martha nodded. "Yes, right by a fallen tree. Why?" Clara sighed deeply, her voice dropping. "Martha, that must be where the accident happened." Martha frowned, confused. "Accident?" Clara hesitated, then spoke. "A few nights ago, a young man and his little daughter were driving back from town. Their car skidded off the road in the storm, near that very spot. The man didn't survive. The girl was rescued, but she's been in shock ever since. No one's seen the family dog either. Some said it ran away." Martha's hand froze midair. Her mind flashed back to the broken crate, the baby blanket, and the metal tag. For Emma, "Love always, Dad." She felt her breath catch. "Emma," she whispered. "The little girl's name is Emma?" Clara nodded sadly. "Yes." Martha's eyes filled with tears. The pieces fell into place. These weren't strays. These were Emma's puppies. They had survived the crash, alone, frightened, and still clinging to life. She looked down at the 3 of them nestled together, sleeping peacefully in the basket. Her heart broke all over again. They were looking for help, Martha murmured, and somehow, they found me. Clara placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Maybe it wasn't luck, Martha. Maybe they were led to you, because you were meant to save them. That evening, Martha couldn't shake Clara's words from her mind. She sat by the window watching the sun dip behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The puppies slept soundly by the fire, unaware of the story they carried, a story of lost love and second chances. Martha's fingers brushed the small metal tag on the table. The engraving caught the last bit of light. For Emma, love always. Dad. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she wrapped the tag carefully in her handkerchief, tucked the puppies into a basket, and started toward the village hospital. Each step was slow but determined. People turned to stare. The sight of the old woman walking through town with 3 tiny puppies in a basket drew smiles and whispers. But Martha didn't care. She was on a mission. At the hospital, a nurse recognized her and led her to the children's ward. Through the glass window, Martha saw a little girl sitting silently in bed, her eyes empty, clutching a worn stuffed toy. Her hair was messy, her small shoulders slumped. Emma, the nurse whispered, "You have a visitor." The girl didn't look up, not until she heard a soft bark. Her head snapped toward the door. Martha stepped inside slowly, setting the basket down. The puppies yipped, tails wagging furiously. Emma's eyes widened, disbelief washing over her pale face. "Do you tinker, Bella?" she gasped. Tears welled instantly as one puppy leapt into her lap. The smallest one crawled forward weakly, pressing its nose to her hand. Martha's throat tightened. "They made it to me," she said softly. "They wanted you to know they're safe." Emma sobbed, clutching the puppies to her chest. Martha smiled through tears. For the first time since the tragedy, the little girl's eyes shone with life again. In that moment, Martha realized she hadn't just saved 3 lives. She had helped heal a broken one, too. The days that followed were filled with a kind of warmth Martha hadn't known in years. Every morning she walked to the hospital with a small basket of flowers, a thermos of soup, and the 3 puppies bouncing excitedly around her feet. Emma's eyes would light up the moment she saw them. The hospital staff began calling it the puppy parade, and even the doctors paused to smile when the old woman and her furry companions arrived. Each visit brought Emma closer to healing. She began to talk again, soft words at first, then laughter, then stories about her father and the little family they'd once had. Sometimes she would hold the heart-shaped keychain close to her chest and whisper, "Daddy would have loved you for saving them." Martha's heart swelled with love every time. Though she had rescued the puppies, she realized they had rescued her, too. The loneliness that had shadowed her cottage for years was gone. Her home now echoed with tiny footsteps, playful barks, and the laughter of a little girl who had found joy again. When Emma was finally discharged from the hospital, Martha invited her and her grandmother to visit. That day, her small cottage transformed. Fresh flowers in every vase, warm bread baking in the oven, and 3 wagging tails greeting them at the door. As Emma ran through the garden with the puppies chasing behind her, Martha stood on the porch, her eyes misty. The golden light of evening bathed them all in warmth. She thought of her late husband and whispered, "You see, Harold, our home isn't empty anymore." The smallest puppy trotted up to her, tail wagging as if it understood every word. Martha bent down, picked it up, and smiled. It wasn't just the beginning of a new chapter, it was a new story altogether. One written by love, kindness, and 3 tiny lives that had found their way home. Weeks later, the little village gathered for its annual spring fair, a day filled with music, laughter, and the scent of baked bread drifting through the air. This year, though, something felt different. Word had spread about the old woman who saved 3 abandoned puppies and reunited them with the little girl who lost everything. People called it the miracle of the woods. Martha stood near the flower stall, her basket full of freshly picked daisies, as Emma ran past with the puppies bounding after her. The crowd smiled wherever the girl went, the trio of puppies yipping happily at her heels. Their coats gleamed now, no longer matted, no longer weak. They were healthy, joyful, and full of life. A local reporter approached Martha with a warm smile. "Miss Martha, is it true those puppies led you through the forest?" She chuckled softly, adjusting her shawl. "They did," she said. "They begged me to follow them. I didn't know it then, but they were leading me to their sister, and to a part of my heart I'd forgotten existed. As the fair continued, Emma stood on a small wooden stage holding one of the puppies in her arms. The mayor announced that the puppies would be given honorary collars engraved with the words, "Bravery, Loyalty, and Love." The crowd erupted in applause. Emma's eyes shone with tears as she turned toward Martha, mouthing a quiet, heartfelt thank you. Martha couldn't hold back her tears. The sight of that little girl smiling again, surrounded by love and laughter, was more than she'd ever hoped for. She looked up at the sky, the soft evening light spilling over the hills. "You did good, little ones," she whispered to the puppies, who wagged their tails proudly. Later that night, as the fair lights faded and the village quieted, Martha sat on her porch with a cup of tea. The puppies slept in a pile beside her, their soft breathing mixing with the sounds of crickets. She smiled, her heart full. "You came into my life as strangers," she whispered, "but you left me with a family." And under that starlit sky, surrounded by love and second chances, Martha finally felt what she'd been missing all along, the kind of peace that only true kindness brings.